Our main funder is the SBA, and that's going to come up a couple of times in this conversation. And basically, there are 1,000 SBDCs in the country. If you relocate and you're looking to start a business, it's actually great resources all over the country. There are 14 centers in Colorado, and we have an office in Boulder and in Longmont. So we work with Boulder County businesses. We actually work throughout the state of Colorado with more advanced companies from Boulder, just because it's something we do. So we do, the actual do of what we do is one-on-one consulting with businesses. There's about 50 consultants, presenters, mentors that work with us. So one-on-one consulting at no cost, all kinds of expertise and knowledge, skills. Kind of been there, done that stuff. We do all kinds of workshops and programs, events, and then we're a connection to resources. So I think we all want to say that, you know, whoever you reach out to first, we'll try to get you to the right people eventually. So just to give you some frame of reference, last year we worked with over 600 businesses, 2,700 consulting hours. So we crack. Thanks.
Hi everybody, my name is Cliff Harold and I run the Boulder Economic Council, which is the economic development arm of the Boulder Chamber. And when you hear economic development, most of you probably think, well, you're selling Boulder and attracting businesses to the community. How hard is that? And the reality is that that's not what we focus on, even though that is the conventional approach to economic development. What we do is a little bit different because we're in Boulder and Boulder likes to do things differently, I guess. What we focus on is an important part of economic development in every community, but it's emphasized here. And the emphasis here is placed on working with existing Boulder businesses and helping them prosper here. So we probably spend 15% of our resources on that idea of selling Boulder and trying to bring new businesses here. Lots of businesses want to be here, and we're not going to be snotty about it and say you can't be here. But we will spend 85% of our resources working on the companies that are already here. And I think that's relevant to today's conversation because the businesses are already here were the ones that suffered, obviously, the brunt of the impact of the flooding in 2013, and will suffer whatever other kind of economic or environmental disruptions that we will experience at some point in the future. So our job is really to form relationships with especially the primary employers, which we can talk about later in Boulder, and make sure that their needs are being met by the community and they continue to prosper here. So I'll be happy to talk more about what kind of economy we have, because part of the reason we're focusing the way we are is because Boulder has a unique economy, and I don't use that word lightly. So hopefully somebody will ask a question about, well, you said it's unique, prove it. Or maybe a question about, what is a primary employer? I don't understand what that means. So a lot more to talk about, but that's kind of who we are and what we focus on. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Chard. I'm with the Boulder Office of Emergency Management. We're a city and county entity, which means I've got about 1,000 bosses. So like everyone usually does in these sort of participatory organizations. What do I do, or what does my organization do? Most people ask the question, what do you do for a living? Do emergency management. You go, oh, that's so cool. What do you do? Because do you handle 911 calls? No, we don't. So we're sort of a mitigation office, a preparedness office, a response office, and a recovery office. So we have these different phases of things that we're involved in. Basically, I'm a paid professional paranoid. I'm the person that sits in the meeting and says all bad things are going to happen, you're all going to experience it, and most people spend most of their time resisting our efforts. Been around the country talking around things. This is a great little sort of thing to do with folks to demonstrate the question Jennifer's going to ask about preparedness. But how many people in here have a kit, a go kit? Okay, raise your hand. Great. Not a lot of you. Okay. How many people have got an emergency plan with their family, which talks about how we exit and then we'll reunite? Excellent. It's down to 2. This is where this goes. I've done these talks across the nation. It's the same sort of thing. And out of the remaining 2, how many people woke up this morning and said, what is going to kill me? So that's what we talk about living in risk, and these are the things you have to do. It's constantly wake up every day. I do that every day. I have to wake up and check weather status. I have to look at what things are going to affect our community because I have to be leaning forward and anticipating when things are going to happen. There's some of the talks today about variance and variability and all those things. Well, if you don't even pay attention to what's going on, that even gets wider. So my office basically handles that. We try to look at what's going to be a problem in our community. We try to prepare for it through preparedness efforts with our community. We plan, we support response, and then we also have an active role in the early phases of recovery, but longer term, we end up taking a support role in that area. So that's what we do. And the three things in an elevator speech would be, we're about connections, relationships, and building capabilities. And that's what emergency management tries to achieve on a daily basis.
So one of the things we wanted to do is we talk about economic resilience. We kind of talk about the economy and how it's doing and the role the economy plays in kind of buffering the effects of disasters as well as long-term stresses to the economy. So I'm going to let Cliff go ahead and tell us a little bit about Boulder's economy and what drives it.
Okay, so that didn't take long to go to the what's unique about Boulder's economy. So the thing that I want to emphasize, in fact, the most important takeaway, at least from what I have to offer today for you, is the diversity of Boulder's economy. People talk about diversity all the time, and it's maybe an overused word like innovation or sustainability or whatever, but I'm going to try to sort of explain how uniquely diverse Boulder's economy is. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is that Boulder's a small community. 100,000 people, 30,000 of whom are students. So this is still a pretty small community, and we have sort of an outsized economy for the size of community that we are. And part of that is, in fact, most of that is driven by our diversity. So there's a lot of different ways to define it, and I'm just going to focus on a few of them. But one of the most obvious is we're very diverse from an industry point of view. Boulder has an economy with very, very strong presence in aerospace companies, bioscience companies, clean tech companies, IT companies, natural organic product companies, outdoor recreation companies, research organizations, tourism. I mean, I could go on, but those are kind of the big hitters in Boulder's economy that really provide a very diverse base for our economic performance. Just if you want me to go through this again, I can, but in fact, I hope that the breadth of those industries gives you a good sense of it, even if you don't remember every single one of them. But there are other dimensions of diversity that are important to think about. One of which is that Boulder's economy is atypical for a suburban community like Boulder, and is particularly unusual for a community of our size. One of those dimensions is our manufacturing base. Boulder is actually a very, very productive community from a manufacturing point of view, which also means that we export lots and lots of products and services. So if you think about some of those industries I mentioned, like aerospace, like natural products, like outdoor recreation, we have companies, many of which are names that probably, hopefully, come to your mind right away, that are producing goods and services that are being exported literally around the world. And that provides an economic diversity that is a little bit different from most suburban communities, which tend to be kind of retail, service-oriented, kind of serving the local residents in that area. It's a little bit rare to see a community, again, of this size and suburban as we are, to see that kind of manufacturing intensity. I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but we're talking about billions of dollars a year in product being manufactured and exported around the world. The important thing to keep in mind about this, and this goes to the primary employers, I said earlier we work primarily with primary employers, is that when you think about the U.S. trade balance and current account balances, the trade balance that we have in trade that we do around the world, well, nobody talks about that at the city level, very few, but it works the same sort of way. When you have companies that are producing satellites and drugs and tofu and backpacks and hardware and software, and selling those around the world, think about what happens to that. Those are exports that import capital, that bring in capital, and that's what fuels this economy more than anything else. And that gives us incredible strength and robustness, and again is another dimension of what makes us unique from a college town point of view, to have that kind of manufacturing base. And then the last dimension that I'll talk about, even though there are others, is that we also have a very, very robust startup community. So we're not all about sort of, businesses moving to Boulder, or companies like Uber acquiring companies like Bing, or Twitter acquiring companies like Gannett. We're really homegrown. We really grow a very significant percentage of our economy locally through startup activity, entrepreneurial activity. And that too is very, very rare in a suburban community. Fort Collins a little bit, Boulder certainly, Golden a little bit. But the fact that we have such a robust startup community is another dimension of our diversity. And we can talk more about that startup piece, because I think it's vitally important. Just as importing capital is a very strong advantage that we have, so is our ability to grow our own businesses locally. And so all of those things combined add up to our diversity and contribute to this idea that I'm asserting here, that Boulder's economy is unique in its place in the world.
So that economic strength has helped us weather some of the shocks that we've faced, including the Great Recession. And when you looked at Boulder's economy and some of the economic indicators, we did have a spike in unemployment, but our rate stayed consistently below both the state and national rates. And there were other measures that showed that Boulder was able to weather those kinds of things. But when it comes to natural disasters, although a healthy economy and healthy businesses help, that's not enough. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we wanted to look at, is what we experienced during the flood, and are there lessons that we can take out of it, and unmet needs and gaps we can identify to use to help build Boulder's economic resilience. So I wanted to start with Mike and kind of talk about the experience and the role that his organization played in the flood.
Great, thanks. So our role in the disaster is going to be supporting initially the response. So police, fire, city, county departments that are shifting or tilting away from normal focus, and then taking on the burdens that are providing response to the community, and then addressing unmet needs. And in a disaster, something like 2013, the size and scope of that was something we've never seen before. You got to realize that the planning model that we were working under many times was don't do that whole like everything's going to flood, that will never happen. Okay, and then just do one drainage or two, but nothing's ever going to flood every drainage. And on that night, we had every single drainage in our county was flooded. So that was an unprecedented experience within our lifetime. I'm sure it's happened before, but we just went around for it. Our role of our organization then is to really kind of coordinate communications, get resources in from outside, so that they can continue to keep the response going, collect information, develop situational awareness, and then help the policy group get together and start figuring out what needs to happen. During this event, specifically the economic development side of things, one of the things we find is that the business community sits kind of silent. And that was what we walked away from after the fact. We do a good job in dealing with people having to evacuate. The shift is not on what's going on with the business in a lot of ways during the response side, but boy, you sure find out pretty quickly just how important that is to be tracking that or be engaged within that sector of our community almost from the get-go. So the role of us after the response is over is starting to get damage assessment done, coordinating with state and federal agencies, and then starting to get people connected to the various departments of the city and county that have that focus. So an example would be of housing issues. I'm not a housing expert, so our health, our human services and our housing departments are the ones so we need to get them connected with state and federal agencies that can, and also in the private sector resources that are coming in, nonprofit groups, make sure that they're getting put into the right lanes where we can force multiply our capability in addressing recovery issues. So the other side of what we do after we get damage assessment done is and get through the emergency response side of recovery as we transition into city county departments, and we load those departments up then with the responsibilities of executing longer or medium to longer term recovery needs. And then we start focusing on after action reports and improvement planning. And that's where we stumbled into the business sector. And it was through an after action report process that we actually discovered gaps. And one of them was really focusing around the connection with the business community and being able to just communicate. Basic communication networks and information flow, not just from the EOC out to the community or the business community, but also how to re-engage that community and bring what their information needs are. It's helped us with damage assessment, unmet needs. Also, more importantly, kind of helped us know what we needed to do from the business side to get into that recovery sector. So that was kind of our experience. Take all day afternoon and probably go over lessons learned and over gaps and things like that. The remarkable part of everything, though, is our community did a fantastic job in holding things together. There was definitely things that were gaps, but when you think of the disaster, the size and scope that we had, we were able to hold it together pretty well because of the amount of connectivity we had on the front end with many of our sectors. Some were not as strong relationships, but it was enough to make sure that we were able to get into the recovery phases of things and look at things in a way that exposes, because had we failed in other areas of, let's say, response, that would have sucked up the bandwidth and the ability to look at things more systematically. But because of its successes in that response and through the preparedness side of our efforts, it then was able to see further, as we climbed that mountain, to see some of the areas that we were neglecting. So that I think is going to, future improvements is going to really add some resiliency into our overall community.
Okay, so there were really a couple of key roles that we aspired to anyway. I'm not sure that we delivered on them as well as we would have liked, and we learned some lessons as well. The first was that we are a highly partnered organization. As I mentioned earlier, Boulder Economic Council is the economic development program or arm of the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. And so we're pretty highly partnered in the community. We work very, very closely with the county. We work very closely with the city. We work very closely with the university. We work very closely with industry associations like Naturally Boulder, a natural products industry association. So we're a highly connected organization. So one of the first things that we did was reach out to our partners, particularly the city and the county and the SBDC, to sort of understand who's on first. What are we doing about this? Because as the magnitude of the impacts became clearer and clearer, and it wasn't exactly slow moving, but I remember driving to work that morning going, where is everybody? I've seen limbs down in streets before, and I didn't really understand the magnitude of what we were facing until probably like 9 o'clock that morning. And so it really became the first step was reaching out to our partners to touch base with them about, do you know what's going on, and what are you starting to do about it, and what are we going to do together on it? So that was really step one. Not very sophisticated, but at least we had the presence of mind to not just sort of huddle down and worry about ourselves. And then the second thing that we did was, Boulder Chamber is about 1,300 members, 1,300 businesses, and as Mike suggested, they weren't all calling the Boulder Chamber, what do we do, what do we do? They were all doing their own sort of emergency response work, most of whom probably did not have any of those three things that you asked about earlier, go kids, plans, and what's going to kill me today? Was that what the third one was? Ouch. But many of them were sort of also kind of bouncing off the walls trying to figure out what to do. So we had sort of a little kind of phone tree thing set up where we were calling our members and we were reaching out to them. And I'll be honest with you, most of them either weren't available or were busy, or weren't going to be calling us back because they had their own priorities to deal with. But for those contacts that we were able to make, we were able to connect them to emergency resources at the city and county, and make sure that, because many of them had no idea that those resources existed. So that was kind of the big second step that we made, was reaching out to our constituents, our stakeholders, talking with them when we could about what they were doing and making sure they were aware of resources available. And I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the follow-up that we did, because that's where it really became, I think, more significant. That was sort of, that was that day, and really the next 3 or 4 days, that was what we were focused on. But this is, we're still working with companies that are impacted by this, that were impacted by the flood. And so this has been, there's been an ongoing effort that we can talk about later. But those first few days, that was what the Boulder Chamber attempted to do, and for the most part, I think, achieved some success in responding to the flood.
Yeah, so anybody here who was in Boulder or Boulder County during the flood? And were you impacted personally in your residence, or? Yes, and business? Great, not great, but you know what I mean. Thank you.
Wow, that's sensitive.
Yeah, well, we won't be sensitive here. Okay, so partners is really an operative word here. I would say fragmentation is going to come up a lot, and it came up already. So you made a comment earlier, businesses were silent, and I've never heard anyone say that, but that's really what we experienced. We had to go, so we work with businesses. You work with 600 businesses a year, that adds up to a lot of businesses. And so we were able to try to reach out to our businesses. Of course, the ones that were really impacted didn't get our emails, and didn't have time. What we did find were the ones that weren't impacted. So we were able to kind of get our arms around where is it that this problem is happening. Partners in the sense of the cities, the economic development organizations, the downtown districts. A big call was to downtown Boulder, Inc., to find out what's happening there, because we weren't driving down there. We were waiting to hear from someone else what was going on. And they actually, because they could have been in a really dramatic flood path, they actually asked people not to come down, not to shop, not to help the businesses by bringing dollars yet. And it was maybe 1 or 2 days. But so we tried to see if there was anything we could do literally hands-on here. And it turned out that there wasn't a lot of impact there, but it was a really good precautionary measure. So the first thing was to find out who wasn't impacted. The who was impacted, I want to talk about a lot, because they were hard to find, they were hard to communicate to, and they didn't realize that we were even trying, which was so sad. Okay, so I told you SBA was our main funder governance. So the SBA has, there's the SBA, everything's an acronym, the SBA DRC, Disaster Recovery Center. And then there's the SBA BRC, Business Recovery Center. So my office is a partner, they call me up, and I run around with them all over town, looking for a place where they could locate. I just want to give kudos to Liz Hansen from the City of Boulder and Gary Sanfison from Boulder County, because without them, it would have taken a much longer time. Like anything, things take a long time to figure out, and real estate in Boulder is a tough conversation, but they helped. It took us a long, going back to what Cliff said, it took us a long time to get our brains around what are the next steps here. So we were not prepared. Mea culpa. This is nothing that my team had ever done before. Because my house was flooded, I went to the FEMA Center. I met the disaster recovery people from SBA just because I told them I wanted to know who they were. And somebody was nice enough to let me sit down and just give me a frame of reference of how this could work. they're very careful not to say this is how it will work, because it's different everywhere. Mike laughs at me. It's different everywhere. But what happens is FEMA comes in, they expect the businesses to sign up with them, but it turns out they don't help the businesses. But that's okay. FEMA comes in, SBA comes in to help the businesses with loans, and then at some point down the road, federal money will come to the state, a program will be developed, and there is potential grant and loan dollars for impacted businesses, federal money coming through the state. And this is Mary Ann Valentine here up front, who is my partner in crime. Mary Ann gave me some of the partners on that it's called CDBG-DR, Community Development Block Grant.
Did you get that?
I know what disaster recovery, I'll tell you what all the letters are. So we're still working on that, and we'll go into that more. But, so the day of, we ran around with SBDC and tried to help them find a location. We tried to communicate out to businesses. We tried to answer as many calls as we can. We tried to get in touch with partners because we had some good information, or pretty good information, and we were hearing a lot of information that wasn't very good. I went to a meeting that was a block away from a major center for FEMA, SBA, and other resources. And there was a meeting that was called by businesses because they were sharing information amongst themselves because they felt like nobody was listening. And I was the real accurate information source, which was scary. But I was able to tell them, go 1 block away, and all of these resources are, it's where Twin Peaks, the new mall is coming in. And it was available and open. And that's what you look for in this kind of situation, facility. So that was the beginning. We went through that. We went through trying to help businesses literally apply for money, trying to help connect businesses to any resources we could find. There's an arts grant from Vermont or New Hampshire that businesses that are arts businesses affected by a disaster can get some short-term funding. It's pretty amazing. I wish we could find much more than that. So that was the beginning, and it's kept going. We're still in the thick of it. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. Thank you. Sure.
So as we look at the things, I mean, we obviously just talked a little bit about the things that went well and some of the areas that we can improve on. One of the issues, and something that you had kind of pointed out, is that maybe a lot of businesses don't have these plans and don't know where to go for assistance. So are there things that we could do or information we could give businesses or bare minimum that would help that situation?
If I had the plan that would solve that problem, I would probably be a very wealthy person and sell that. Human beings are difficult to motivate, especially when they don't perceive a threat or need. So as Sharon kind of talked about how a lot of businesses were coming together, it's the time to come up with your plan is not when you need it. And that's, I think, what some of the gaps are. So we look at the business community. We run the Local Emergency Planning Commission, which deals with EPCRA law, which is EPA law that deals with community right to know act, fire protection and community right to know act. And what that states, it commands, reporting and planning around facilities with certain thresholds of hazardous materials, and they seem to be better prepared for these type of events. We found those facilities, checked in with them, they seem to have good continuity to their business rules and holding it together. It's the small business and the entrepreneurial communities that you talk about, folks that even if you have a job, no one really overstaffs to do. I want you to be that professional paramedic organization, just run around thinking things that's going to threaten our business continuity. Some people will have that. You'll see that in high-tech industries, but when we go and we talk about it, it's more on information management, data protection. It's not about the human resource piece where what do you do when your employees can't make it to work, or how you can communicate with your employees, and what is really the coup plan moving from one place to the other. Those are things that are struggles with businesses, especially if they don't have a lot of resource, or startups or small businesses, or there's not a huge profit margin in maybe their business plan. They're using just everything they can to keep doors open, and you can walk in the door and say, yeah, why don't you spend some money and some time on something that maybe it will happen 1%. Generally, people have a hard time listening to that, so that's the challenge. So what we're exploring is, moving forward, is how do we do a better job communicating outward. We're calling it just-in-time preparedness. As the models of 2016, we're trying this with people and also with the business community. If we can find ways to have our messaging better, and also more importantly, systems that we can bring up, and then start messaging that out to the different exposed populations of our community, and give them the preparedness message, and hopefully they can create some capability around that in the moment, because not everyone is impacted at the same time. So what we learned from the flood was, there will be people that are ground zero that have to run for their lives or evacuate their business, and the preparedness there is get the heck out, go to a shelter, we'll pick up the pieces there, and patch it together. But then there's zones of now future notification, maybe that's hours to days, and we wasted valuable time, or valuable opportunity, I should say, not time, and being able to start messaging differently and say, hey, look, if you're not in the evacuation zone, you should be on the watch out, and here's some things you can do to prepare yourself for that, as opposed to saying, here's what's happening with the flood, here's the areas it's moving. So we're thinking that, and that seems to grab a little more with people, because when we want to do something is when the universe opens our mind, right? And all of a sudden you're like, I really don't care about preparedness, and all of a sudden wildfires are approaching your house, there's smoke, there's a flood in there, all of a sudden you're very interested in preparedness, and you will learn very, very quickly, provided we can put it in. I used to teach a lot of firefighters and paramedics, and you treat 3 things to people at a time, and chunk the information, they'll remember it because they're stressed. We try to explain 7 things to people, they'll forget 4 of them. So do 3 things again, stagger it, and so we're using that concept. And I'm hoping the work we've done, we'll talk about later, with just our ability to create connection and communication and an information flow will then help increase our overall preparedness in the business community around that. Because we have found resistance over time. It's not like we haven't been trying. We've been out, and there is definitely, it's a hard message to sell. I'm not there trying to sell 8-track tapes in a digital world is what it feels like. For those of you that don't know what 8-track tape is, you'll welcome to my world. That's how hard it is. So that's just some thoughts about preparedness. And the similar thing, and that's why I did that thing, the whole auditing piece in the beginning of this, is you yourself, just not only for your personal preparedness, but you work in businesses. So that same attitude carries to your work life as much as your daily life. And you saw how quickly we had 2 or 3 people that even have a kit, and then from that it was 2 people that have a plan, and one of us is crazy. So that's the barrier to preparedness with businesses and personal preparedness. And we're trying some different strategies, and I'm trying the same thing over and over, because it's the old model isn't working. You got to come up with some different ways of approaching it.
So Mike said it really well, and I don't think I have anything to add, but maybe Sharon or Jennifer will.
So the program that Mike alluded to is the economic developers. They have, in Boulder County, each community has its own economic development group, and a lot of times it'll be public and private. And as we were looking at abstraction reports and realizing that we didn't do as good a job of reaching out to businesses or even coordinating some of the information, we felt like that was a gap, and it felt like it would be nice if there was a business organization out there that could help us. And it turned out that we already did. We had economic development folks that were getting together on a regular basis anyway, and we just started to introduce this as one of the things that we could maybe do part of our public-private partnerships, but also if we're talking about the economy and talking about businesses, and we're all familiar with the businesses in our area, maybe that's something that we can put together. So that's something we're currently working on. But one of the questions I also wanted to ask was about business resources, and as we start looking at communications, one piece that's certainly very important, but then being able to, on top of that, when there is the need for assistance after a disaster, the question is, first of all, are we getting the information we need quickly enough from the resources, and then are there enough resources out there for businesses, or are there unmet needs? Wow.
Yeah. All right, nobody's taking this one.
Yes, we are.
So, I'm going to do the second one first. Are we getting the information out to businesses? I don't think in general we're getting information out to businesses as effectively as we could. And then when you layer on any kind of disaster, it gets harder. Everybody's in a crisis situation, and everybody, including the organizations, are in a crisis, personally, business, organization. So it gets harder. So getting the word out was hard. We've begun in this group that Jennifer mentioned to talk about how we're going to plan to do it the next time. So that, you practice ahead of time, you kind of have the thought, you're all speaking conversation, and then we're inevitably going to be doing a better job next time, getting the word out. So one of the things that was so exciting to me was Mike's idea that we have one phone number, and I think it was Mike who said, put it on a magnet on your refrigerator in your break room in the business. And that all the organization, we all funnel into one place, so that we get information from one place and we provide information to one place, and we keep updating into one place. We're all smart people, and why didn't we do that before? It's not that easy to do. So if I understand correctly, there may be some projects that come out of this conference, and that would be a great. There need to be more resources for business in general. I think that we're moving in that direction. I think businesses are asking for more help and willing to accept more help. And there's a lot of resources that are now collaborating in all different ways so that we don't duplicate and kind of do good handoffs. And it goes back to the same thing. You come to one of us and you find out who you really need to end up with. So I think that's the same for disaster.
So one of the resources I can see that, this is my second heavy recovery lift. So we did the 4 Mile fire way back in 2010, and we just closed that recovery up 2 months prior to this flood happening. So that gives an idea how a fire of 169 homes burning takes, how long it takes to recover. So this will be a decade of recovery, and for some people it will be a lifetime. But some of the resources that can be brought to bear, necessarily aren't in money, but also can be in how can government shift or make it easier for businesses to rebuild or reopen or provide assistance in streamlining, code. How do you modify the code and ordinances, or how do you create certain tax zones that make it easier to come back on it? The whole rebuild process, where it may have taken a year to get through that process before you streamline it somehow. And those are the things that every community, I don't know countywide we had that well spelled out, so I'm curious with the business perspective. I know we tried it with, the city of Boulder tried to adjust some of those things, and we had the FERPIC, which is the Flood Recovery, Permit and Information Center, which was designed to try to get, batch people together and streamline process. So, but you don't know if that's enough. So, the things we got to find out now is we did the AAR in a lot of ways, but this is a 10-year process. We're going to learn continually from year to year, so it's important that we keep connecting with the business community to find out, did that work, did it not, where's the gap, what are the additional resources that need to be either provided or brought together as a capability to help the businesses rebuild and also generate revenue and get back to supporting the community. Because without the economic engine, recovery does not happen. And that will keep you in a longer, sustained, deeper recovery burden if you can't get that economic vitality back in your community. So it's a fair amount of importance after disaster. As much as saving lives, you got to save businesses.
Don't need to pick on Sharon, but one of the questions about saving businesses, between Sharon and Kurt, do you feel like we were able to save a lot of businesses, or do you feel like we lost some businesses?
So I would be very reluctant to claim that we saved businesses. Businesses saved themselves, those that were able to. I can or two that weren't able to save themselves, but I'm not omniscient. There's probably dozens out there, maybe hundreds, that weren't able to, but I'm only aware of a couple. I think we collectively, hopefully maybe at least gave them some confidence, some sense of a kind of a backstop if they were, when they were struggling. But I really, kind of honestly think businesses did it themselves. They kind of bootstrapped and, kind of did what they had to do to make it work. And so I guess I'd like to think that we provided some kind of a safety net or some kind of sense that there was somebody to go to when you ran into a wall, but maybe I'm not sure I would claim any credit at all for getting over the wall or through the wall, and I'm not sure many of us would, to be honest with you. And the businesses that I know that were impacted the most were, they worked hard at the process, the resources that were available to them, but I would say that most of them found it frustrating. They found it bureaucratic, they found it kind of, more trouble than it was worth. Here's your check for 10 grand, but you spent however many hours, hundreds of hours trying to deal with the bureaucracy. So to be honest, I think we could probably find some businesses that were like, you were part of the problem, not part of the solution. I should have just focused my resources on what I can do, within my own sort of network of resources. Now, I think that most would not say that, but I do know of a couple that were very frustrated with the resources, or the lack of them, and the bureaucracy that it took to access the resources. So I really think it's a testament to our kind of entrepreneurial spirit, our kind of can-do attitude of most of our businesses that really got them through it. I like to think that we helped quite a bit, and for some I know we did, but that's kind of my sort of scattered experience of it. And I still hear some of these stories even as recently as this year.
So I would say it's always the businesses that do the work, do the heavy lifting, take the risk. I mean, the credit always goes to the businesses. I think we did some stuff to help. Some communication, being a sounding board, trying to get good information out, and that's as good as it can be in certain cases. It's been an ongoing process, talking about the bureaucracy, an ongoing process trying to tap into the funding that is available. And the businesses I know are very frustrated. The SBDC is actually kind of the front door of one of those processes, and we have a hard time with it too, because we tend to be the messenger, and we wish we could make it smoother and easier and much more consistent in all the processes. Know what the processes are in the beginning and make sure they stay the same all throughout, and that really hasn't been what occurred. So I think we get a little credit. I think the businesses get the most of it. What I do want to say though is, and this is kind of sad and interesting to watch. So small businesses can be at all stages. Pre-startup, early stage, they're very fragile in the very beginning. And there were some that were so fragile that literally they closed their doors. And so I do know a lot more businesses, smaller ones, that they were the first, you think of the ocean washing up on the shore. They were the first ones that were out to sea. It was a break your heart conversation with them. We didn't have that much to offer them because they didn't meet any of the criteria for any of the funding, for any of the resources that were available. The next stage are businesses that were really actually seemed to be doing quite well, and they became more fragile. So I think if anything, we had more impact there, where we could help them kind of shore up where they were. And that happened through helping them apply for loans, helping them market immediately, and as soon as possible, open and get customers. And when I say we, I mean the larger we. There were lots of folks involved in this, lots of organizations, lots of businesses that worked together to make sure that everyone knew we were open for business and come and support the businesses. And lots of people came. I mean, Lions had days of people up 36 just going to buy something and support the companies. The third level is businesses that are really robust. And I will tell you that they felt the impact too. And so nobody went unscathed of the people that were impacted by the actual flood. Now, the interesting part is most businesses not impacted at all. We did kind of meetings, kind of meetups all around the county to try to figure out who needed help right in the beginning, because this is when we were looking for the businesses, and nobody showed up in Lafayette. Nobody showed up in Lafayette. 3, 6 showed up in Louisville. I mean, there were areas, and even in Boulder, there are plenty of businesses not impacted, and they don't understand. But there are businesses now still impacted, so it's hard to watch the ones that are still struggling, and great to watch the ones that were never impacted at all. But I think if we could kind of look at programs that help each of those layers going forward, it would be pretty helpful.
Real quickly, Jennifer, give people an idea on where, I'll use my theater voice, to talk about the region, just to give you a perspective of that. So everywhere in the county we're flooding, we're the bullseye for the flood. 17 inches of rain fell over those 4.5 days that we had. South Boulder Road and Flatiron Parkway was one of the sites, and then up in Lions. City of Boulder took a 5,600 CFS event. You put that 17 inches west of the town, we got a different picture in downtown Boulder. So with the mitigation efforts, absorb that. We're talking about a 25-year event. All right, Lions had 32,000 CFS go through it. Left-hand Canyon had 8,800 CFS go through it down in Longmont. And the same rain rechanneled and then went completely out its bank. So we had homes and businesses were even a floodplain, underinsured, and we didn't see the risk. So there's a lot of factors. It's how they have massive infrastructure impact within power, sewer, water, roadways. And these all have huge impacts on businesses from the standpoint of access for their employees. We had Lions were shut, we had containment National Guard for 60 days, 90 days, of not even letting people come into the community because the community felt so open and vulnerable that looting was their concern, and why Victoria and her team is just fantastic. It's all partnership. The community, the residents, the businesses, the nonprofits, government coming together. I think some of those partisan communities are great examples of how that happened. But just kind of talking about, I love how you put those 3 layers, because depending where they got hit, Louisville was, Coal Creek was down through an area that, in fact, more private residences, Lafayette being kind of perched high, but Erie had some problems, and Longmont. But Boulder did get impacted, but you look at where that could have been from the volume amount, that could have been even more catastrophic from an impact to our infrastructure and business community. Just wanted to give people the context for that.
Thank you, that's really helpful. So it sounds like, because we weren't as impacted as much, and you were able to, you said that before, it's easier for us to kind of, in hindsight, take a look, and we have the opportunity to really look at lessons learned. It sounds like we've come up with some ideas and things that we could do better. I guess the other side of economic resilience is kind of those long-term stressors, like housing costs and transportation and cost of availability of commercial space. So I wanted to ask Cliff, are those kind of the things that can impact our economic vitality, and are those things that we should be considering when we look at economic resilience?
Sure. So this is kind of intuitive, and I think almost all of you in this room could answer this question in your own way. But we're not an island. We're not even though we're sometimes feel like we're a bubble. We're not a bubble. We are part of a highly interdependent system, a highly interdependent network. And I would say of the hundreds of companies that I talked to, during and since the flood, 98% of them, the greatest impact was to their employees. It wasn't their building, it wasn't their suppliers per se, it was their employees getting to work. And for some of them, they were down for weeks because critical employees couldn't get to work. Mostly, that was because critical employees were dealing with flooding in their home. But the point is that we are, again, as a relatively small suburban community, part of this very large interdependent network. Most of the jobs in Boulder, most of the employees in Boulder don't live in Boulder. There are about 100,000 jobs in Boulder, which is notably large. That is, in fact, that is one of the things that makes us, again, unique in terms of our economic strength, that the size of our job base. But estimates range from 50% to 60% to even higher than 60% of those jobs are not held by Boulder residents. Now that's not that unusual in a suburban metro area. In a metro area, people are commuting all over the place. That's not unusual. But given that it's such a high percentage of our employees that commute to Boulder, to jobs in Boulder every day, that's a vulnerability. In some ways it could be seen as a strength, but that's a vulnerability when disasters happen. The ability of people to get to their jobs is critical to the livelihood, the prosperity of those companies. And so I would say that was by far and away the largest impact that most businesses in Boulder felt during that disaster, and others as well. But again, it was so widespread, as Mike suggested, that employees throughout the region were affected, and as a result, so were businesses. So it's important to think about things like transportation systems as part of that interdependent network. It's important to think about communication systems as part of that interdependent network. It's important to think about broadband systems as part of that network. We are increasingly dependent on broadband. Longmont, entire wide area network for that community. Boulder may someday get our act together to get there sooner rather than later, we hope. But that's a whole other system, that part of our interdependent network that will be vulnerable to these kinds of disruptions. Now, some of that, it's a two-way street. Some of those systems, make us stronger and make us more resilient. Many people affected by the flood were working from home. They were able to do that because those systems were in place. And 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been a very likely solution to the problem of transportation mobility. But it's just important to think about it. And I think this is, from at least my perspective, and economic resiliency, the most important thing is that we are highly dependent on these interdependent networks, on these systems that hold us together, and whether it's physical, like really obvious physical mobility like transportation, or whether it's technology-driven connections like broadband or other communications. That's where both our strength and weaknesses lie.
We call that 1984 planning. So in our AOC, for example, we have a 1984 plan, as I call it, and that is what you have to run our system, our operation, using the technology available in 1984. So those of us that are old enough that were working at that time, you knew if you had a pager, you were pretty cool. There's no such thing as a cell phone, landlines only, but these are the things that I would agree with Cliff, is why they work great when everything's up and going, but in disasters very commonly, many of that infrastructure that you're so dependent upon will get ripped out. And in many communities, and if not forever, but it'll be for a shorter period of time. So our goal is to try to how to get those things identified, those vulnerabilities, strengthen them so they don't go down as easily. But how do you get them up to going is a real challenge. But part of the preparedness piece is what's your 1984 plan is, the simple things, like how can you communicate? Do you have a phone tree plan? Something simple, and those things are hard. These littlest things seems like they're so trivial, but it's like you said, putting the thing on the refrigerator. The simplest things sometimes are the most genius things in a disaster that will get you through it. And how do you work without your smartphone, and how do you communicate as an organization? And these are the things that a lot of times people aren't testing. Or the other fail point would be is everyone has a plan, but without a training and exercise component to it, the plan is useless. You have to exercise it like everything else. You just can't have a person sitting in a closet eating some Cheetos, writing a plan, and then think that that's going to be resilient and going to hold its weight when you have your disaster. So that's another fail point we see a lot of times in government, private sector, personally too, is training and exercise is going to really also carry the day.
Just one quickie. One thing that we had a couple of scientists that had SBIR deadlines, Small Business Innovative Research Grant contracts, and they had to find lab space all of a sudden. I mean, fast. It was like a 2-week deadline. So one of the things we've talked about is maybe kind of having an inventory of our assets. We talked about making sure we know where all the co-working spaces are and all of the different places where we can set up, and organizations have agreed to set up business centers. So if you're in business, you have no communication capability, you can come to a center and use it for a period of time, a shared space, just a temporary pop-up kind of shared space. That would be a good thing. But something like lab space, commercial kitchen space, things like that, that's real for businesses.
So I've asked a bunch of questions. Does anybody in the audience have a question?
Okay. Maybe for Cliff or Sharon, did the flood impact adversely as well? Meaning, did the flood hit retail or transportation let it hit tourism? And inversely, had just electricity gone down but no flooding, would that reverse the impacts? Like the IT home workers would have worked, but retail could go on.
Thank you. That's a good question. The fires that Colorado experienced several years ago, and will probably again, the flooding. Those were national news events, and it did have a big impact on not just tourism, which would be the thing that would come to mind first, and that's a good observation on your part, but also on decisions that people were making about, do we want to even be in Colorado? And not just businesses. Sometimes people think that economies are all about businesses making decisions and moving to a place and starting their business there, and that's sort of kind of how an economy grows. It does, but in Colorado's case, and certainly in Boulder's case, what we've experienced more than anything else is that it's individuals that are making decisions to move to a community that are really ultimately driving this economy. It's the talent, it's the skills, it's the experience, it's the resources that individuals bring to this community that are fueling our economic vitality as much as anything else. Businesses will move here because that talent is here. Some people think it's the other way around, and in some communities that's true. But when you have this when you have these events, when you have these catastrophes, and you're not local, and you're reading about it, or hearing it on, seeing it on the internet or on TV, you really start to think, well, maybe Colorado isn't a place I want to be, or maybe Boulder isn't a place I want to be, and it can really have some interesting kind of ripple effects like that. But it will affect different companies differently, and companies are as diverse as people are. There are many companies in Colorado, in Boulder, in the Front Range, that have really incredible business continuity plans. They can go for indefinitely, but many of them have to. We're not talking about just mission critical, we're talking about life critical. We're talking about hospitals, we're talking about research labs that are doing research on new drugs or new technologies that will save lives, millions of lives. The whole National Weather Service depends on information produced in labs in this city. It's kind of ironic that, what we're all looking to the National Weather Service for information about some of these catastrophic events. And the data that, the Weather Channel and National Weather Service are using is actually generated, across Broadway over here. So are they vulnerable to these events? Absolutely they are. So the diversity of our economy, it is an interesting question because it will affect these companies differently. And even if you're Ball Aerospace and you're building, this satellite that, Digital Globe runs, that most of our phones work off of in terms of GPS, that was built in a clean room on Arapahoe Avenue. That satellite that our phone GPS depends on, built in a clean room on Arapahoe Avenue. And so Ball, the labs, hospitals, bioscience laboratories, they all have to have their own sort of plans to deal with this. And it makes it a challenge for us because we're trying to sort of skim the surface here. They're doing really deep dives into each of those areas. I'm not sure I got all of what you were looking for, but it's a really interesting question in terms of how the diversity of impacts play out over time.
So the only thing I want to add is, so yes, yes is the answer, and so I now have experience with one disaster, and so I think I know what I'm doing. And we're really looking, which I don't, and we're really looking to Mike to help us figure out, so if it's not this and it's that, what does that look like? So as we plan forward, we can broaden what we're trying to accomplish and get people ready in a different way.
Hi, I'm Tom Jones with Digital Globe. And so I just
So
wondered.
did I get it roughly right?
Roughly right, yes.
Thank you.
Correct. Ball does amazing work, you're right, and they'll probably be in business for quite some time. They too have a diversified business, obviously.
Absolutely.
Glass and can manufacturing. So my main question is, in an event, how do you connect people who can and want to volunteer to help with those who need the help? I think, if it snows, usually each business has a hotline or some sort of a guide of whether or not you need to come into work. If CU is closed, for instance, I've seen that. Or, a lot of times the CFO makes the call and you just have to call into the main line and there'll be a message on there whether you need to come in. Some people have the means and the desire to say, okay, well, I don't have to go to work today, but maybe someone's in trouble that I can help, and then you multiply that towards, a real event like flooding or a fire, etc. How do you, within a community like this, are going to be people who can help and there are people who are in need of that help. How do you connect the two? And maybe there are mechanisms today that I don't know about, but, or maybe there are ideas that you want to implement.
Feel free.
No, you're
Speak.
Oh, Mike.
Yeah, so we call those a couple things. SUVs, spontaneous unaffiliated volunteers. Then there's also volunteer organizations that assist or are active in disasters. I work with Boulder County BOA, and one of the gaps we found in the business community was that we had a poor connection with the faith-based community, nonprofits, other groups that had a capability, didn't know how to get connected, didn't know how to tie in. We've been working, facilitating with those groups for about the last 5-6 months now, and we're making progress on that. So we're looking at how we as government can create better connection points with those groups to get them information they need. Also, we're currently devising ways to create like a registry of unmet need, to where groups or people that wanted to come in and help be able to come in, get a list of unmet need, find that, touch it, not even have a government pass through, we're just doing information posting. There, I think, is an opportunity to expand that beyond those volunteer organizations to see what the business community maybe could take and create, I don't know what we call it, maybe it's a BOAD, you know, it's a business organizations active in disasters, and we use some of the learning from that and maybe apply it over so that it's really focused on the business community of how you can help one another. And I think Oscar Blues is a great example of that with some of their work they did to help, you know, get money and some startup funds to people that were struggling. It'd be great to kind of broaden that out. So we have some work to do there, and I'm interested in any business groups that would like to talk about that and creating such a program. We do have that, I think, tighter with individual unmet needs, but we do definitely, I think, have an opportunity here to expand that concept to the business community.
I think you've nailed it, but I do think it's important to recognize while we're talking about businesses and their response that Ball Aerospace was one of the first companies to step up with a major donation, $1 million donation in response to the flood recovery. Oscar Blues, what was that called? The cans. They did this.
But it was a neat concept.
Cand-Aids.
Yeah.
You know, they did this awesome thing, mostly for Lions, but it went well beyond that. In stepping up, Boulder Brands did some incredible work. So, and it wasn't all just cash. A lot of it was mobilizing volunteers at a company by company basis. But it still goes to your point. So where did they go? I mean, who does Ball Aerospace call to deploy? 100 volunteers that are ready to work this weekend.
Yeah, so I think it's wonderful. I just heard about VOHAD like last week, which is, a testament to fragmented information. One of the things that we learned, businesses that are going to go after grants and loans shouldn't do the work themselves. They should get a third-party contractor and have a receipt. And so there are a lot of businesses that, isn't that something? I mean, you would think that if we all chip in and we help everybody, it's a better thing. And it turned out that it may not have been. And then there are businesses who couldn't qualify for the money, so of course we would have wanted to help them. So it's one of these, we got to figure this thing out better. But I think it's a great idea. The example is, every year, people who are above a certain age can ask to have their snow removed. And there are people that come into my neighbor and remove the snow, and different people every time, and they're happy to do it, and they are giving back, and people from the neighborhood go and help also.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we all want to do it.
Being an SBDC representative, I have two questions. One is there a reverse 911 type of communication with businesses, just like we have with residents? And is there a database of residences throughout the county? That's only one question.
So yes, we do have Everbridge. It's an emergency telephone notification system. If I say reverse 911, I get a letter from a lawyer saying you can't use that as a trademark name. So Everbridge is our company. What that uses, the database we have for all landline phones, the ability to be able to send you an emergency notification. That includes businesses and private residences. It's also an opt-in feature. So you can go on there and you can get text messages, emails, multiple phones, multiple locations. And if we draw a polygon and we say we send a message, you will get an alert, hopefully. Things happen with that. A lot of people don't have landline phones anymore. They may be living in a residence, we don't have their phone number. So we have on our website, boulderoem.com, you go there, there's a site link that'll take you in to register into that system. Also, if you don't like solicitor phone calls, it will block the phone message that we'll give you. So once again, while that is an effective means, when it comes to public warning for public or business, it's highly important that you have multiple means of receiving those messages. You want to be a weather radio, so everyone gets on right up to the point though where they're going off all the time, and then they put them in a closet or they don't pay attention to them. I, of course, have 2 other radios at home, and I like to listen to everything that's going on in the state of Colorado. My wife, it's become background noise to her now, finally, thank gosh, but I want to know what's coming into my county as much as I want to know what's happening in my county. So these are things that businesses need to do, is how do you get your information sources? Do you know where they are? Know the websites ahead of time, know where to go, have multiple means of receiving emergency notifications. One only way is not an effective plan, because, you know, if you lose a telephone, because either it gets scoured out or the telephone lines burn off, you're not going to get the message. So we do have it, yes, and it's probably more a typical plug there for emergency notifications. So we do have it. It has worked pretty effectively, but it's not a perfect system. So yeah, we have multiple ways of what we want to do.
Okay, so part 2 of the question is there a database of businesses? And of course there could be. There really isn't. So just as you'd imagine, the media is trying to get numbers so they can report what's going on, and we all got called, and we all called each other thinking someone else had the answers. You know, and so I called the City of Boulder, Boulder Economic Council frequently. City of Boulder, City of Longmont, Boulder County, and lots of other municipalities have GIS specialists. They have either departments or specialists, right? You all know GIS? Geographic Information Systems. If we had a here's my soapbox. Mary Ann just fed me. So if we had a database of businesses that were geocoded, we could overlay it on the GIS system. We knew where the impacts were. We knew, all the county, city, everyone knew where the impacts were. We could have known, even if we had to go to the sites, if they didn't have communication, we could have gone there to communicate with the businesses. And we did go door to door, by the way, but we missed lots. So it would be a more efficient way of getting the communication. And if it was a diverse event, and there was communication available but not something else, it might have helped them. So I would love to see that happen before the next thing.
So what we have to kind of help with that is we now have a damage assessment plan and team and technology city and county just invested, which will be live here in the early part of 2016. That actually will go out in the field, you will take the pictures, it's after the fact, it's not prepared side, but we will be able to take, collect data at the site, geolocate that, bring that back, it will automatically populate into a GIS layer. So all the residences and structures that we will be actively doing damage assessment on will then be fed into that database, and we have that data at our fingertips.
And
To address that very issue you're talking about.
It's great. The piece we're missing is that we don't know who the businesses are.
That's, yeah.
And we want to. And we all know how to do this. That's the frustrating thing.
Okay, second part of my question is, would you all describe to this group what a business continuity plan is? It's one of the key things that FEMA recommends for all businesses, and a lot of people just don't know exactly what that is.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is not the encyclopedia definition.
That's the right definition.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's a plan that's not made in your closet while you're eating Cheetos. That will help you prepare certain pieces in advance of some shopping event. And so some of the pieces that we know of that we would like to help businesses with would be how to figure out if you have the right insurance, and lots of resources, who to go to get the right insurance, how to duplicate all of your technology, have not just backup, which that's a whole other conversation. We have to start with conversation with businesses. Do you back up your systems, let alone do you have it duplicated? What are other pieces of a continuity plan? Obviously, where your employees will go in an event, that kind of thing. Is that the kind of answer you're looking for?
Exactly.
So a few more additions to that would be also what's your devolution plan, meaning that your CEO, your board of directors are all impacted, let's say they're injured or incapacitated or dead. Who makes the decisions for your business now because you just lost I know it's dire, so this is why people go, get out of the room, you don't want to talk anymore. These are the things we want people to discuss. If you can't get hold of someone or they're impacted, who's going to make decisions for your business? That's a big part of continuity. how do you move from one another? And I like to say this, the continuity plan is the plan no one is ever going to reference when they actually need it. Because no one ever pulls a plan out, it's the old Eisenhower thing, it's not the plan that matters, but it's the process of planning that matters. So we had 23 different facilities in city and county that were affected, and a couple of them were longer term. We had to actually physically move our operations to maintain a continuity of government off-site. All the folks we worked with, we had plans on them all. Guess what they all said afterwards, Mike, we didn't look at the plan, sorry. Okay, but they said, you know what, those exercises you ran us through, the tabletops, oh my gosh. We knew, just because of that, the relationship, I knew Sharon, and I knew I needed to call her. So at least if nothing else, I knew who I needed to call so I could make the contact, and then we could figure out in the moment what we needed to do, and then we referenced in our brain chunks of that, but really it was the value of making that connection, that relationship, the continuity planning really helps. And I'm not saying that you won't, but generally a lot of people don't at the operational level maybe understand that your planning elements in your business, maybe some higher level decision makers or supervisors are definitely going to be pointed out to strategically look at carrying it forward. But we have a copy of that on our website with the business plan. And you actually have it in our information management system within our EOC. But we also have a Word document that businesses can take offline and can take it back. We heard that back from, we used to go in and try to educate people on continuity operations planning. Businesses don't want to hear that. They want a tool, they want it, just tell me here's a tool, tell me what I can use this to be done. I don't need to be educated on it, I need to have a tool. So we went ahead and responded to that, and we created now a tool that our partners can give out and dispense and help people with the planning. Because they're the experts in it, we're not just going to help them get the tools and they can go out and hopefully use it. So that's continuity.
Oh, sure. Hi, my name's Laura Sardier, and I'm with Local Strong, and I actually have a question that kind of follows up with what Mike was just saying. So one of the initiatives we have going on right now is building resilience for Boulder County. It's a very small job. And we've got one person working on resilience network, so building a resilience network. So let's connect people, businesses, nonprofits, government, to get everybody, working towards a common goal and knowing each other. And there's the BOAD, which was already talked about. We're doing an assessment, and then I'm working on capacity building. One of the things that we're doing is getting people in the room together to have a conversation. And this has been going on in the U.S. resilience for very recently, very new, but internationally for 8-10 years. And the private sector is mostly always missing from that conversation. And one of the things I would want to do, and I know other people are working with, is bring them in to the conversation. So they don't want to sit around and, I think, mostly not go through exercise and then doing education. And so do you have suggestions on how we can kind of bring them to the conversation at the table?
So I was at the meeting last week in Vermont. I think it's easier to get the organizations to be represented at some of these discussion meetings. And I understand your question is how do you get the businesses there? And it's the same problem that we have on how do we get the businesses to, even businesses that were impacted by the flood, who told me, when this is over, you come in and we're going to write a plan. They don't have time. So it's going to be really hard to get businesses to come. It would need to be very easy, fast, efficient. It can't be long policy conversations. They have to be something has to get done during the meeting. That's what we've learned from everything that we do. So I don't know if that helps.
Time is money.
And we can partner
Yeah.
to do that. And I think partnering is kind of the name of the game on all of this.
So the question you're raising is a very important one, but it's one that I sort of get asked in one way or another almost every day. We have this conversation constantly with the city about outreach on new policies. Have this conversation almost every day on industry associations like Naturally Boulder that I'm on the board of, about how do we reach out to more companies in our industry. And it's almost impossible to answer it in a kind of definitive way. My sort of flip answer when I get asked that question is, You can't expect them to come to you, you're going to have to go figure out how to go to them. And I've figured out some ways to do that a little bit for the work that I do. So I'm actively involved I connect with businesses by going where I think they are, which is usually some kind of a trade show or a meeting of their peers. So whether it's the Colorado Space Coalition, or whether it's the Colorado Bioscience Association, or whether it's Naturally Boulder, as I mentioned, or the Colorado Technology Association, I try to go to where they are and make connections there. And I also try to leverage what those industry associations are doing to connect with businesses in their industry. But it is a constant challenge, and the unfortunate thing is I think it's getting harder almost daily, because we're inundated now with all sorts of information through all sorts of channels, and how you rise above that noise is just getting more and more difficult. And it's not just businesses, it's individuals. I mean, we all are having this challenge of where do we focus our attention given how much of an onslaught of incoming information there is. So, again, there's no really good answer to that question. One thing that I'll also mention kind of in response to Mary Ann's question is, businesses are not monolithic. People talk about the business community like it's a monolithic thing, and it's no more monolithic than any other kind of categorization that we like to, buckets that we like to put things into. We know that there are something like 100,000 jobs that we can document in Boulder, but we also know there's probably 20,000 jobs that we can't document. People working at home that don't do business licenses, that don't have a sales tax license. I mean, there's no documentation of their business as an entity. That's 20,000, 100,000. We're talking about 20% swag here that who knows. And they're also diverse, as Sharon said. Some of them are incredibly small businesses that are only thinking about being a business, but they have a name and they have this vision. How do you connect with those versus a Ball Aerospace or an IBM? I mean, it's a whole different kind of a strategy. So that compounds the challenge that you're describing. And this is, I'm going to editorialize just for a minute here because I know there's a question in the back that you've been very patiently waiting to ask. One of the important things to think about in terms of economic resiliency, we've talked a lot about businesses today, and that's important. But our economy is not just comprised of businesses. Our economy is comprised of, somebody has mentioned, maybe it was Mike, nonprofits. Sharon mentioned the arts community, the arts and cultural community. And think about the institutions that are important to Boulder's economy, the university, the labs, the hospital. I mean, this is, again, a very diverse economy, and all of those stakeholders, those constituents, make up the strength of this economy. Nonprofits are critical to our economic vitality, as are cultural and arts institutions. So it just compounds that issue of reaching out to connect. So I'm happy to talk with you about it afterwards if you'd like, but it is an ongoing conversation, and I'm hopeful that there will be some sort of role that technology can play in making it easier for people to not have to show up for a city council meeting and sit through 6 hours of, whatever you want to call it, to participate in local governments. That model is broken. It's not working for most people, and it's certainly not working for people that have many conflicting demands on their time today.
One thing you said very fast to your question, a business does not want to invest if there's no return on the investment. I see the gap. The thing that hasn't been talked about that needs to come out is working with OEMs, worked with the Chamber of Commerce and the different economic development organizations within all the communities. And we've come up with a plan for how we're going to take care of communication information. I don't know how well it's going to work, but at least we have a capability that we didn't have prior to this flood. So what I'm hoping is that the way this works is our situation awareness section chief is going to be collecting data that's important and putting that in site. They'll have now access as individual communities to be able to go ahead and grab information and become then, their situational awareness comes up, and then through their networks of communication, because they have the list, at least who they have, hopefully the goal would be is that they will be able to inform out to the business community, get the relationship going, pull back information, push it in. And that, you heard that it was silent or they didn't know where to go or have information. If there is that system, and there is that ability to go, wow, if I invest in this thing called preparedness, I actually get information that will help my business during a disaster, then this thing starts to have value. And then all of a sudden people are willing to invest in that, hopefully. But right now, if we bring people to the table on preparedness or emergency management or maybe continuity planning, it has diminishing returns, I think, in a lot of the views of the business owner, and we need to shift that. So I'm hoping that the connectivity and the information flow and the situation awareness and active disasters may be something that can bridge the future resiliency discussions and involvement from the business community that I'd like to see.
It's actually really simple, it's not a question, it was just pointing out some resources to your question about how to volunteer after disasters. Most disasters, I'm not sure what the criteria is to why it's not all disasters, but after most disasters, there's a long-term recovery group. So Boulder County has one for the floods, and they have volunteer coordinators, and they have case management. So any group, whether it's an individual or a business group, and they've hosted a lot of business groups, can come in and do recovery work on the cases that the long-term recovery group has. So we're working with homeowners who sustain damage. So that's something to look for more in the long-term recovery phase. But also in the immediate aftermath, there's a new thing coming out from Help Colorado Now, which is a statewide entity that can point you towards places where you can either donate or volunteer post-disaster in any county around the state. They do have a newsletter that you can sign up for. It goes out monthly right now because we're sort of in a recovery phase with any volunteer opportunity that is part of disaster recovery in any disaster-affected county in the state. And then following a disaster, it will go out more often, whether that's daily or weekly, whatever's appropriate. And that'll also indicate on there whether it's an individual opportunity or a group opportunity. So if you have employees that you want to bring together to go do something in the community, or you just want to do it yourself, and just sign up for the newsletter, and it comes out at least monthly, if not more.
That's great.
So Robert tells me that we've got about 2 minutes left. So what I wanted to do is thank all our panelists. And does anybody have anything else they wanted to add? Robert, did you have any housekeeping things that you wanted to let people know about?
We're just gonna go to lunch now, and it's just gonna be served right here. Feel free to come back in here and eat, or go outside. It's a beautiful day. But we're gonna be back at 1:30 for the afternoon sessions.
If you all just